Welcome. It's time for the Mr. Constitution Hour. This is our weekly, hourly broadcast. I am a radio guy, so once again, if you visit my video channel, you're looking for short videos, you probably won't find many, if at all. I'm a radio guy. I spent 15 years on AM/FM radio. This program, Mr. Constitution Hour, used to air on Saturday nights at 8 p.m. on KPRZ, the Answer. KCBQ, The Answer San Diego, and KPRZ, K-Praise in San Diego. And when I discontinued that program earlier this year, I thought, well, why not migrate it over to my YouTube and Rumble channels? That's what I've done. So if you're watching either later or live, then that's what you're watching. My former radio program on the San Diego stations, and I've just migrated it over here. Welcome to the program. I am Douglas V. Gibbs. I'm known as Mr. Constitution. And if you are watching live or you wish to watch live, you can participate in the chat room. Please do, even if it's just to say hello, because the more chats I get when it comes to my live videos, more chats in the chat room, more comments on the comment page, then the better the algorithm is, I guess. And, there's always, hit the follow, hit the subscribe, all that jazz. Definitely support this programming. And, of course, you can go to douglasvgibbs.com as well. And let's bring me up a bigger picture. There we go, bigger picture. I always forget to do that. Just, at the beginning, I like the other image to be kind of the early image. And then, anyway, all right. Still not doing the advertisements yet. I haven't figured out how I want to do all that just yet. Being a radio guy, I used to have an engineer that did all that for me. And, we had advertisements that were created for my show and for the station and all that jazz. And then they would worry about inserting it and do the intro and the outro. No intro music. I just start talking. We'll get that all fixed. I'll get my radio guys. I'm still friends with a couple of the engineers, and we'll figure it out as I do this here. But anyway, that all said, welcome to the program. Once again, I am Douglas V. Gibbs. And, as Mr. Constitution, and I'm watching, and I know we mentioned this a little bit last week, I watched this DSA socialism rise of whatever going on in the United States, and I'm thinking to myself, founding fathers designed the Constitution specifically to stand against some of the stuff that these people are pushing, if not all of it. When we think about the Constitution, the founding fathers, we think about, them doing what they did to fight against monarchy, because that's what, came. We don't think about the fact that they knew what socialism was, even though it wasn't called that at the time. They knew what, redistribution of wealth was, all of that. And so they wrote the Constitution and designed it in ways to guard against that. But also they wrote it based on their, let's adjust this just a little bit. There we go. They also wrote it based on their personal experience, the early experiences of the colonists, early America, all of that. And so I was watching some of this, and there's a list. It's like almost 70 things that's on the DSA platform. If you've read it's not a manifesto. I can't remember what it's called. Their wish list, basically. And some of them could be combined. So if you combine the few, they could be combined into one. Like, for example, government control over private property and rent control, that kind of goes into one, right? Good afternoon, Autumn Rain, who is at Rumble. Just put something in the chat room. Hello, good to see you. And if you have questions, comments in the chat room, I do pay attention to it. Glad that you were able to catch this live for those of you watching later. Last episode, we actually had, I don't know, half a dozen to a dozen chatters going on in the chat rooms, and it was kind of fun. But anyway, so be sure to chat if you're watching live. But anyway, get back to what I was saying. So the founding fathers, they understood what socialism was. They designed this Constitution also based on their experiences and under the Articles of Confederation. Now, because I'm going back to the DSA, Democratic Socialist America, some of the things they're calling for. They're calling for, that's right, I was saying that they have like 66 items. It's 70, but you combine a few, it's really about 66. And some of them are get rid of the Senate, demote the president to something that's a part of the House of Representatives, basically have a House of Representatives that's democratically voted in, have it control executing the law, have it, get rid of the Senate, because we want pure democracy is what they call for, and they think that sounds good. And the founding fathers purposely guarded against democracy. So they want to get rid of the Senate. They want to get rid of the presidency and make him subordinate to the legislators in the House of Representatives. They want to demote the Supreme Court to either not existing or under the House of Representatives. And understand something. A lot of what they're calling for is what we were under the Articles of Confederation, and it was failing. The reason why the Constitution added a Senate, because before we had only one chamber. The reason why they added a Senate, they made it two per state. They designed it not to be democratically voted in originally, which was changed by the 17th Amendment. Why they designed, the president was originally the highest ranking member of the legislature, the Congress, and he was, basically just a high ranking legislator. So he was beholden to their whims, and they realized they needed the president to be separation of powers. They needed him to be able to make his own decisions independently on certain things. They learned their lessons, so they created it this way. So basically what DSA, what the socialists are calling for, is for us to go back to what was failing. And we learned the lesson. It was falling apart. America was doomed. So they wrote the Constitution to change it away from these things. And what resulted was over 200 years, almost 250 years. We got about 240 years with the Constitution. It was written in 1787, so we'll hit that mark next year. That was written to get away from what these people are calling for. Most people don't know that George Washington was not the first president of the United States. He was the first president under the system created by the Constitution. There were a number of presidents before him. I want to say, was it 11? I think it's 11, but really 9, because 2 of them had served twice. They were 1-year terms, and they were beholden to the Congress. So why would in the Constitution they say, well, that wasn't working. Let's make sure this person is separated from the Congress. There's a separation of powers so that Congress cannot micromanage him. Why would they do that if what DSA is calling for is better? Because it isn't better. And they learned their lesson through a number of things. So let's talk about the presidency, why it's separated, why it's a separate power at the moment. So first of all, we'll go back to Polybius. Polybius was a Greek political philosopher. He was in Greece at the time that Rome had grown to the point that they finally were able to take over Greece. And he then got captured by Greece. By Rome, and he was actually kind of jazzed because he liked the Roman Republic. He respected the system that had been developed, and he had some ideas for it, but they didn't listen to him. And ultimately, Rome went the way that all tyrannies eventually do, because they didn't follow their foundation and ultimately fell apart. But anyway, so the reason why I bring up Polybius is one of his, I think his most notable quote or most notable idea is that the lawmakers should not be the lawgivers, or must not, and the lawgivers must not be the lawmakers. What he was calling for was a separation of powers. What he was saying is, well, if whoever makes a law can't be the ones enforcing the law, they got to be different entities. Now, government does both those things. So he wasn't saying there needed to be separate governments. He was saying that there needed to be separate bodies in those governments, and a law-making body and a law execution body. So he was calling for separation of powers all the way back to, the dawn of records in our history, right? And so then Montesquieu, a French writer, he capitalized on that. He says, hey, Polybius is right. There needs to be a separation, but it needs to be greater than that. The lawmakers, the law executor, and the law appliers all need to be separate from each other. The law appliers being the courts. So 3 branches of government: legislature, Congress, 2 houses in this case, in our case, the body that makes law, repeals law, and modifies law. The president, the executor, executive branch, executes the laws, and then the courts who apply the laws and assign sentences for breaking the law. Once due process is met and all that jazz. So first of all, the founding fathers understood from just a basic sense of what they knew from Montesquieu and from Polybius that having the president as a part of the legislature wasn't working. They had already experienced it, plus they had historical voices saying it's not going to work. Then they had another way of finding out, too, that it didn't work, and that was the Revolutionary War. When George Washington was made general and commander-in-chief over the American forces during the Revolutionary War, in the beginning, he was tightly monitored and micromanaged by Congress, the legislature. The legislature dictated to him his moves, and we were losing the war badly. 8 of the first 11 major battles we lost. We lost Philadelphia, where the capital was, where the legislature was meeting in 77, as a result of that practice, making the commander-in-chief beholden to the legislative body was not working. And George Washington told him, hey, unless I can operate without you micromanaging me, we're going to lose. The only time, and when Washington around Christmas of 1776 pulled off the miraculous Battle of Trenton and Princeton, that was kind of his evidence. And then Valley Forge, where the training and stuff, hey, when I'm left to do what I need to do the way I know how to do, because I'm commander-in-chief, without you, all you desk jockeys dictating my moves, we're successful. I cannot be burdened by a bunch of legislators. I have to be able to take care of the job that I know how to do independently without interference. Now I understand the responses at the time, because these guys are coming out of, complete control by a monarch, and so for fear of having a dictator monarch type figure, they went the opposite extreme. But the opposite extreme was also dangerous. So they had to find something that was a balance. You need a single figurehead. You need a single person that runs certain parts of the system. Commander-in-chief, executing the laws, things like that. And they learned this. Once George Washington was given the free rein and he was able to do what he needed to do, the war turned eventually, and we won it. And so during the Constitutional Convention, when they were talking about these branches, this was a part of the discussion. This was a part of the conversation. We have to make sure that the president can do what he needs to do without legislative interference. But the fear is he will become a king. He will get out of control. He will do things. So separation of powers, his job is commander-in-chief, foreign policy, and to execute the laws. Nothing more. He can't make law. He cannot adjudicate law. He is the head of the executive branch. We will, in the necessary and proper clause, give them the authority through law being made to have tools to execute the law. That's where agencies, departments come from. Article 1, Section 8, clause, I think it's 15, 16, 17, right around there, that Congress shall make law that is necessary and proper for carrying out the foregoing powers, and anything comes up through constitutional amendment. And since the carrying out those powers belongs to the president, Article 2, Section 1 vests that power in him. Article 2, Section 3 says that he must faithfully execute those laws. Then that's the limitation. You execute the laws. You don't make them. Separation of powers. but you will not be micromanaged by the legislature. You are independent to take, because you're in the real world situation, President. We're behind a bunch of desks. We're not dealing with the real world situations of negotiation and war and what, that the money we thought would go to this wasn't proper because this happened, so President, take care of it. They understood that he had to be given a certain amount of free rein. Adobe Dave, good to see you at Rumble. We got 2 Rumble chatters, still waiting for the YouTube chatters to speak up. So this idea by the DSA of the president being demoted to just a member of the House of Representatives and there be no Senate, once again, we tried that under the Articles of Confederation and during the Revolutionary War with the Congress micromanaging George Washington before they finally cut him loose to be the commander-in-chief without their interference. We tried it and it failed miserably. The Constitution was written the way it was for a reason. It wasn't just a bunch of guys getting together. Hey, this sounds like a good idea. Historical research and real world application. Then another part of there is that we'll get rid of the Senate. Well, it's not very democratic because even small states have as big of a voice as the majority. Right. That's the point. Democracy is always is the voice of the population centers. In other words, when you have pure democracy, it is a government by the cities, for the cities, of the cities. The city's voice is the dominant voice. And the voice of the minority voice, the voice in agriculture, in agrarian areas, smaller areas, is so small because they don't have the numbers that they don't get heard. And what ends up happening historically every single time is then you wind up with a bunch of representatives from cities dictating to farmers how to farm, for example. And it never works. The people in these rural areas, these farmer agrarian areas or whatever, need to have a voice that's strong enough to be heard. Otherwise, the city voice will run away with everything and ruin it. Because that's what they do. Because they look at things differently than those who take care of themselves out away from government, who doesn't want government interfering with their operations at all. They're not dependent for anything. So they look at government differently, and that voice is important if you want the proper balance for a republic. And the Founding Fathers understood this. Originally, we had a single house legislature, a single chamber under the Articles of Confederation, the same one that had the president no more just a member of the legislature, which didn't work. The Founding Fathers, and you've got this battle. If you read Madison's notes during the Constitutional Convention, and my friend Warhamster and I are going through these notes on his channel at rumble.com/Warhamster, capitalize the W and the H. And these guys are arguing over all of these worries over certain factions controlling things. The smaller states are saying, hey, the big states are going to team up against us and control everything. And the larger states are saying, you give the smaller states too much power, they'll all team up against us and ruin life for us. And the slave states are worried about the states in the north dictating them, and the states in the north who are trying to get rid of slavery, they were all slave states at that point, were worried about the slave states having too much power. Industry versus agriculture. Maritime economies versus industrial industries versus industries that push raw materials, agrarian. All of this is going on during the debates during the Constitutional Convention. And the problem is, once again, when you have democracy and you have one chamber of Congress, of a legislature that is single-minded, you have problems. So you need a second chamber. Rome did it. Rome did it with the assembly for the commoners and then the Senate. Britain did it with their parliamentarian system, House of Lords, House of Commons. Of course, the House of Lords has been almost rendered, to nothing at this point. Part of their problem. Well, Doug, are you saying you want aristocracy? Not at all. I'm saying you need two chambers of a legislature, and they need to be different from each other. Two heads are better than one, but two heads are not better than one if they're the same exact head. It's like when you are working on something, you want somebody else to look at it. You don't want someone who thinks exactly like you to look at it, because they're not going to find what's wrong with it. You need someone who looks at things from a different point of view. My wife is the perfect proofreader for my writing, because we are nothing alike. Opposites attract. She spots things that I don't spot, and I'll read it 10 times over and miss a stupid error. She'll pick up on it, not only because she's not me and she didn't write it, but also because she's looking at things from a different point of view. And then she'll ask me questions I hadn't considered when I'm writing something. Hey, Doug, why is this? Or what does that mean? And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to write it in a manner that makes sure that's covered. Or that sentence is way too long. It's a run-on sentence, or it doesn't explain the point well enough, or whatever. That's life, right? That's what we do. We look for a differing point of view, and it's healthy. So when you have one chamber of commerce that all thinks the same and they're all democratically voted in, what's going to happen? Problems. So the founding fathers said, okay, we need a second chamber. The first chamber, democratically voted in, voice of the big states. The second chamber, 2 per state, and they are appointed by the state legislatures, which the way it originally was, which would ensure that the majority of the senators would be rural-minded, agrarian-minded. That way, the agrarian voice, the not majority, would have a voice as strong as the majority, population majority that's in the House. So they could check each other. Otherwise, the House will do whatever the heck it wants, and then you got people from the city dictating to farmers on how to farm. Bad idea. So they designed a second chamber. Originally, we did not have a second chamber. We did originally, under the Articles of Association, Articles of Confederation, almost the same thing as the DSA's calling for, except that even that house wasn't purely democratically voted in. And here we are now. We've got someone saying, oh, we need to go back to the old way, basically. No, it failed. It was failing. One of the strengths of our system is the Senate. And even it's been damaged by the 17th Amendment, among other things. It was a way for the states as entities to have a voice, and the agrarian areas to have a voice in the legislature, so that the cities with the House would not be just passing everything, no matter what, that could be harmful to the agrarian areas or the agrarian way of looking at things. There would need to be compromise. There would need to be debate. When there's no debate, liberty dies. When Thomas Jefferson returned from France, and he had first read the Constitution overseas in France. That's when he first saw it. He read it, and he was impressed. He's like, wow, this is not what I expected. This is good stuff. So when he returns, he asked George Washington had been the president of the convention. So he went to George Washington, he asked him about this Congress, this 2-chambered Congress, with the House being democratically elected by the people in districts, and the number of districts being determined by population, which would mean the larger states would have a bigger voice in the House, but the Senate being 2 per state and being appointed by the state legislatures, and the state legislatures are designed in such a way that the state senates also were the voice of the agrarian areas, and largely agrarian states would also have a House that was an agrarian voice. Therefore, the U.S. Senate would be primarily populated by agrarian voice representatives, and also people who were appointed by the state legislature. So they've been in politics for a while. They're trusted. They're, in a sense, a pseudo-aristocracy. And Jefferson says to Washington, this is impressive. Please explain to me what this is about. How'd you do it? What is it? I like it, but I need to understand better. And George Washington says, well, that tea you're drinking there, and you're sipping the tea a little bit out of the cup because it's so hot. So you pour a little tea into the saucer. Then you sip it from the saucer because it's cooler. That cup of tea is the House. That saucer is the Senate. While he didn't say this according to any records, I'm assuming what he was saying was where cooler heads prevail. What a brilliant system. That way you don't have the cities dictating every move in the House, but you don't have the rural areas dictating every move in the Senate. They both have to agree. And even when the House, with their hot heads and their hot ideas and their communitarian thinking, aka socialists, sometimes could be checked and cooled down by the more reasonable voices from the agrarian areas in the Senate. And when the agrarian areas in the Senate want to do something that the cities think is just outright ridiculous, then through the House of Representatives, they can check that. Debate always results in liberty, or at least proper debate. If it's debate with two of the exact same body, not going to work as well. That's the reason why the 17th Amendment was so damaging. The 17th Amendment made the U.S. Senate closer to the House in the sense that now they are directly voted in democratically. Dangerous, ultimately. Good to see you, Mel. Glad you joined us in the Rumble. Once again, Rumble's got all the chatters. I don't know what's going on with you, YouTube. YouTube chatters are not there. Last week, we had a couple YouTube chatters. So here we are now showing, just from history, the Constitution versus the Articles of Confederation, that we purposely made the president separate from the Congress and not being micromanaged by those desk jockeys, and a second chamber in our Congress, the Senate, different from the House on purpose and not so democratic. But yet DSA is like, oh, we have a good idea. Let's go back to what failed. We tried it already. We tried a single chamber Congress. We tried the president being just a subservient member of the legislature, and it did not. It was failing. This country was headed to a great big failure, and they knew it. Or how about the courts? I am not a fan of the courts. I do not like the judicial review idea that has developed over time. I don't like the way they try to incorporate the Bill of Rights to the states. There's a lot of things I don't like about it, but it's still better than having no federal court whatsoever. If they operate the way they're supposed to, it'd be better. But getting rid of it would be even worse. See, originally, the states had their court system. There was no federal court. So if there was a dispute between the states, if there was a dispute in which the central government was a party, if there was a maritime dispute, if there was a dispute with bodies, persons, or entities that were not American, then who do you go to? Where do you go? You want the international court system to look at it? Because the states couldn't. It was beyond their jurisdiction. That's why we have a federal court system. The problem is, part of the reason why everybody's mad at the federal court system is it doesn't operate properly. But then the remedy is not to get rid of it or toss it into the legislature. The way to fix it is to go back to its original design. We tried not having a federal court system. It wasn't working. So DSA, just 3 of your recommendations right there on top. The answer is we tried it and it failed. We're not even going into the failure of socialism worldwide throughout history. I'm just talking about these 3 things that you want. The president to be demoted to a member of the House, to get rid of the Senate, to get rid of the court system, the federal court system, or the Supreme Court. In all 3 cases, that's the way it was before. It was failing, and we wrote a constitution to fix that problem. And it wasn't just because it was a good idea. It was from experiencing the failures, the president, executive, commander-in-chief situation, most definitely proven by the failures during the revolution. We would still be probably a part of the British Empire had we had done it the way the DSA people would have done it. You would still be subservient to monarchies. Had we have thought back then, had the founding fathers thought in the manner that the socialists think. In fact, it would be worse. Because historically, socialism always fails. And that's just the cold hard truth. The Republican form of government is not a democracy. It is not socialist. And our Constitution has been manipulated by the 17th Amendment, the 16th Amendment, the Federal Reserve Act. And all three of those happened just in 1913 during, the progressive era. Three big damaging things happened while people like you, DSA people, were running amok during the progressive era. And, and I hear these different voices and they talk about this stuff. And one of the voices out there, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with this voice, Jon Stewart from The Daily Show. And I can't remember if it was I think it was a podcast. It was his podcast. He called us the Weekly Show or something like that. And he was trying to deflect criticism of the modern economic policies. And he was trying to reflect the accusation that the ideas by socialists are socialist. He's trying to play this word game. This is what the left does. So his quote was, "The energy is around a belief in their economic populism." He's referring to the Democratic Socialists. And when you call it socialism, I think it's a misnomer. In the same way that calling Social Security socialism, that is kind of a misnomer. So what he's saying, and he's right, Social Security is not socialism. But nobody's made that argument. It's a straw man. But he's basically saying, calling the socialism by the Democratic Socialists, which is in their name, socialism is a misnomer. And what he was doing is he was using a rhetorical maneuver that represents a sophisticated but ultimately deceptive strategy employed by today's progressive movement to obscure their true ideological foundations. It's socialism, but don't call it socialism because then, you're not saying it right. Well, if it's not socialism, what is it? Well, socialism, but not the kind of socialism you think it is. Okay, what kind is it? Well, it's socialism. It's democratic socialism. And they try to use these words. I'm like, Nick, it's socialism. And the comparison of contemporary progressive economic policies to Social Security is a textbook straw man argument. Nobody serious in policy debates today genuinely characterizes Social Security as socialism. This isn't merely because Social Security is popular or because it has existed for nearly a century, but because it fundamentally fails to meet the definition of socialism. Socialism in its pure form is government ownership and control of the means of production. And I find it interesting as I get into these conversations with some of these socialists, these new progressives or whatever. Well, you already have socialism. You got the fire department, you got the police. That's not socialism. That's government services. There's a difference. Socialism is government ownership and control of production, not services like police services, but production and services that have something to do with the free market. It represents a system where private industry is seized by the state in the name of the collective. Social Security, by contrast, is a government-administered retirement program. It is essentially a mandatory savings account that workers pay into throughout their careers with the expectation of receiving benefits upon reaching a certain age. Now, whether Social Security constitutes good policy or bad policy or something in between is irrelevant to this discussion. What matters is that it serves as a convenient distraction from the actual socialist policies being advanced by today's Democratic Party. What makes the Social Security comparison particularly ironic is that while it's not socialism, it's actually technically not constitutional either. The federal government possesses no enumerated authority in the Constitution to establish a mandatory retirement system. If such an authority is desired, the proper constitutional remedy would be an amendment, not judicial reinterpretation or legislative overreach. And this distinction between government services and unconstitutional government overreach is crucial. An orderly society requires certain government services. national defense, border security, law enforcement, a judicial system, and infrastructure development. These are legitimate functions of the different levels of government with clear constitutional foundations. Social Security represents something different, a social welfare program that exists despite lacking constitutional authority. And while Stewart and others deflect with irrelevant comparisons, today's Democratic Party increasingly advocates for policies that genuinely do align with socialist principles. Consider the following: government control of healthcare, Medicare for all. It represents a government takeover of 1/6 of the American economy, eliminating private insurance companies, private healthcare practices, placing healthcare decisions firmly in the hands of bureaucrats. The Green New Deal. This proposal goes beyond environmental regulation to fundamentally restructure the economy, with government directing energy production, transportation, housing, and virtually every other sector of economic activity. Wealth redistribution proposals, from wealth taxes to our existing progressive income tax system to proposals for universal basic income. These policies seek to transfer private resources to government control for redistribution according to political priorities. Corporate governance mandates. These recent progressive proposals would have government dictating corporate board composition, executive compensation, and even business decisions based on political rather than economic considerations. These aren't government services in the traditional sense. They are attempts to control the means of production through regulatory authority or direct government control, even though it might not be in the name of outright nationalization. The effect is the same no matter the form. Private economic decisions become subject to government control. The comparison to Social Security by people like Jon Stewart serves a specific political purpose. By framing criticism of socialist policies as attacks on popular programs, progressives attempt to create a false equivalency that undermines legitimate concerns about government overreach. This semantic manipulation mirrors other successful progressive redefinitions. Liberal once meant someone committed to individual liberty and limited government. I am a classical liberal. I believe in the liberalism that the founding fathers believed in. But that's not the same liberalism that today's liberal champions. Progressive was originally framed as meaning those seeking practical improvements to government systems. Today, both terms have been appropriated by an ideology fundamentally at odds with their original meanings and at odds with America. And the basic concepts, principles, foundations of what America is all about. Similarly, economic populism, which is a term now that's going around, serves as a euphemism for wealth redistribution and government control. By focusing on the purported popularity of these ideas rather than their substance, advocates sidestep meaningful debate about their constitutionality, economic wisdom, or philosophical foundations. The American constitutional system was deliberately designed to prevent the concentration of power that socialism requires. James Madison warned in Federalist 47 that the, quote, accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. And this, we just talked about in the first segment, this is what they're calling for. Combining the legislative, executive, and judiciary and both chambers of Congress into the House of Representatives, all in the same hands. It is a drive to tyranny. It is a drive to consolidate all power into one place. That's what tyranny does. That is what tyrants do. In the chat room, when I was talking about Social Security, Mel said something fascinating, and I've heard this before. I remember Dad saying Social Security was to be a supplement to retirement, not as a total retirement fund. Exactly. Take care of your own retirement. Government's like, okay, some people have fallen short. We'll give them an opportunity. But it's just like any type of welfare system. If you need help, a safety net's not a bad thing, but don't make it your lifestyle. It's the reason why the federal government's not supposed to be administering these things. But they do. Unconstitutionally. It's that way on purpose. The socialist vision requires a concentration of power. When government controls the means of production, it necessarily controls the economic fate of every citizen. This power inevitably translates into political power, undermining the constitutional separation of powers of federalism that secure liberty. Beyond constitutional concerns, the economic implications of socialist policies warrant serious consideration. History has demonstrated repeatedly that government control of economic production leads to inefficiency, stagnation, and ultimately reduced prosperity for all citizens. Look at Venezuela. There was this guy, it's on an interview. And this was about 5 years ago, and he said 20 years ago in Venezuela, when socialism was first being voted in, we argued, not here, it'll never go wrong here. We are too modern. We are too giving or whatever. We are too advanced. We are too economically, secure. 20 years later, Venezuela had descended from economic prosperity to collapse. Soviet Union's chronic shortages and inefficiencies come to mind. China's need to adopt market mechanisms to rescue its economy from socialist mismanagement, and it's getting ready to fall flat again. And these all serve as cautionary tales, not to mention the over 100 million people who died in the 20th century as a result of these systems. Even European social democracies, often cited as models by American progressives, have been forced to retreat from many of their most expansive welfare state policies after they proved economically unsustainable. The debate over socialism in America isn't really about Social Security or other popular government programs. It's about whether America will maintain its constitutional system of limited government and free markets or embrace an ideology fundamentally at odds with both. If advocates for expanded government programs believe these initiatives are necessary and beneficial, then they should pursue them through constitutional means. That means amending the Constitution, which includes a ratification by 3/4 of the states. I guarantee you that's what's coming next. They're gonna tell you that the states need to be relegated down to mere provinces or something to fall in line under the centralized system. That's what DSA will say next. I guarantee it. But the states are the reason for the union. The states were the reason for our prosperity. They are there to grant the federal government the authority they seek. Government's not supposed to bypass the constitutional limitations through judicial reinterpretation or legislative overreach. The semantic games and straw man arguments employed by progressives like Jon Stewart, they ultimately serve no purpose other than to obscure the fundamental questions at stake. By comparing legitimate concerns about socialist policies to imagined attacks on Social Security, they avoid defending the substance of their proposals. America deserves an honest debate about these critical questions, not rhetorical misdirection. The constitutional and economic implications of socialism are too significant to be obscured by clever word games and false equivalencies. The future of American liberty depends on our willingness to confront these questions directly rather than hiding behind straw men. We need to be on it. We need to, and we know the story, right? This is a republic, supposed to be a republic. We know the story. When Benjamin Franklin came out of the Constitutional Convention, this is how the story goes. It actually happened inside a building later, but the story, as it's told, is that it was on a grassy hill just outside the State House there in Philadelphia, and a woman walks up to Benjamin Franklin and she says, "Doctor, what have you given us? A monarchy or a republic?" "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." The main discussion was between monarchy and republic. She didn't mention communitarian utopianism. She didn't mention democracy. Why? Because they weren't even in the conversation. Everybody knew they weren't on the table. They existed. Democracy existed, and it had failed many times in history. Communitarianism, utopianism, their words for socialism, communism, had failed. The schemes of leveling, their term for the redistribution of wealth, had failed throughout history. They knew of these things, and they weren't even discussing these things for a reason. And she knew it when she asked Ben Franklin, "What have you given us, doctor? A republic, a monarchy or a republic?" She knew the choices. She was informed. She was a part of the system. "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." People say, well, gosh, it's kind of messed up. She couldn't vote. Actually, that's true. She couldn't vote, not because she was a woman, but because she was married. If you read the state constitutions of the early states, 10 of the 13 original states, the way their state constitutions are written, a single woman, if she could provide proof of at least $50 worth of property, and that doesn't necessarily mean real estate, any tangible property, then she could vote. Married women, well, there's a marital union. The union, you become one. There's one voice for that union, and the man was the voice. Such was the culture. You can scream sexism all you want. That's the way it was. Women began to vote and have more participation in politics as America moved westward into the frontier. Kind of messed up to tell your wife she shouldn't be voting when you needed her to hold the gun while you were building your home so she could fend off any bears or Indians that might attack. So women began to receive more opportunity for involvement as we managed to move into the frontier. Women in the industrial states along the Atlantic coast, they really didn't want to anyway. They believed that was the man's world. Some women did. Some women were involved. Elizabeth Powell was one of them. Elizabeth Powell, who had asked Ben Franklin, what kind of system did you give us, a monarchy or republic? She was the wife of Samuel Powell, who was the mayor of Philadelphia. They were a power couple. They were involved. And the Powell House, which is within walking distance of the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall, if you were to visit Philadelphia today, so why was she there by the Constitutional Convention? Doug, to ask Ben Franklin, because she lived nearby. Powell House was a couple blocks away. So she walks from her house. She approaches Ben Franklin. "What have you given us? A monarchy or a republic?" He says, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." He personalized it. "If you, madam, can keep it." She didn't vote. How could she keep it? We're not a democracy. A vote is not the point. How do you keep a republic if it's not a democracy, if voting is but a minor part of the system? This is where influence, this is where being informed, this is where participating in your civic duties beyond voting happen. And this is what she did as the wife of Samuel Powell, the mayor of Philadelphia, the power couple. They had a nice home. They had extra rooms. So whenever people were traveling, because, the state house there, the Pennsylvania State House, was being used quite often as a meeting place for these politicians. So if there's these notable travelers like John Adams, like George Washington, like James Madison, traveling from places like Virginia or Massachusetts or wherever, and they needed a room, the Powell House had rooms available. And then they were heard. It was told that they would offer these opulent dinners, and this would attract. If you're a traveler, you're there for it's a long ride, man. You need a good rest and a really good meal and good conversation. The Powell House was the place to go. The reputation was there. They served opulent dinners. You're there to eat this great meal in bed and for the money. So you have your big meal, and then you're like, all right, I'm tired, man. I'm ready to light my pipe and relax. So you go off into the parlor with all the other politically minded men, and they all light their pipes, and they start discussing politics. And Elizabeth Powell, being the hostess, she followed them. Sometimes she would even light a pipe with them. And over this, she became friends. She got to know them. She became influential. Over time, it became common to see Elizabeth Powell and George Washington strolling the streets of Philadelphia discussing the political issues of the day. When he became president of the United States, they stayed in touch. There are stacks and stacks and stacks of letters between them that we have. The fascinating thing, if you go to the Powell House, you go to Mount Vernon, you can see these letters, some of these letters. And one of the things that isn't talked about is the letters from Elizabeth Powell and George Washington have an interesting distinction about them. See, when you sealed your letter, you didn't like lick the envelope and close it and stick a stamp on it. The sealing was, you sealed it with wax. You closed the envelope, and then you had, for that wax, you had your stamp, and you would press it on the wax, and it would leave your mark. And then the wax would dry, and that envelope would be sealed. And if ever that seal was broken, then that means somebody opened it. And if you look at the letters from George Washington, they don't have George Washington's, or at least the ones to Elizabeth Powell, they don't have George Washington's seal on them. They have Martha Washington's seal. She was looking over the letters. She was participating in the discussions. So if anybody wants to ask the question, well, was Elizabeth Powell and George Washington, no, they weren't. They were friends. And they wrote these letters back and forth. And Elizabeth Powell, this woman who didn't vote, could not vote because of her marital status. And if she was single, she may or may not have been able to produce that kind of property. I don't know, after her husband died. I don't know. But nonetheless, Benjamin Franklin said to her, if you can keep this republic, and she did. And one of the ways she did is she got to know these people. One of the ways she capitalized on that is she discussed things with them and she influenced them. George Washington loved the fact that everybody's asking him, hey, you're president. What do we call you? Your Highness? Your Majesty? His favorite was your highly mightiness. And it was Elizabeth Powell who said, I think Mr. President should work, George. And Mr. President, to this day, is the moniker we use. Thanks to Elizabeth Powell. But her influence goes deeper than that. Policy decisions, questions, discussions. When George Washington was completing his first 4-year term, he was tired. He had been serving his country for 36 years as a surveyor, as a warrior, as a politician, statesman. He was ready to hang it up, man. His teeth hurt and his body was tired. He wanted just to kick his feet up and be done with it. And he sent out 3 letters indicating this. One to Thomas Jefferson, one to James Madison, one to Elizabeth Powell. And Elizabeth Powell responded saying in her letter, George, you are the foundation of this new system under the Constitution. If you do not serve a second term, it will be seen by your opponents as an abandonment of the constitutional republic. And they will use it in that manner. They will shout that you abandoned the system. It was because of Elizabeth Powell that our nation remained on the right track. It was her influence, a republic if you can keep it. And that's how she kept it. Warhamster, nice of you to show up a little late with 6 minutes left. You know what I ought to do, Warhamster, is just out of habit, I ought to send you the link every week because it's a different link. That way, just in case you want to jump in, you can. I may consider that. which means you'll be jumping in with 5 minutes left. No, I'm kidding. But my point is, getting back to the DSA, getting back to the founding of this country, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitutional Convention, and that discussion between Elizabeth Powell and George Washington, we tried what failed. It didn't work. The Republic exists as it does for a reason. The Founding Fathers didn't just decide, hey, this sounds a good idea, let's try this. They had already learned about the failures of the president being part of the legislature, of the president, or I'm sorry, the commander-in-chief during the war being beholden to and micromanaged by the Congress. We'd already tried having no federal court system. We'd already tried having one chamber of Congress. We'd already seen in history the failures of communitarianism, not only abroad, but right here in America with the Pilgrims of Jamestown, for example. And now we have these youngsters going, hey, I got a brand new idea. There's nothing new about it. You're calling for a failure we've already learned from. The reason for the Constitution is exactly to guard against what you are calling for. Any of you DSA people, if you're listening, contact me. I would love to educate you. Throw something at me. I dare you. DouglasVGibbs.com, DouglasVGibbs.com. They're in the link bar. There's one something that says Ask Doug. Click that. Put your question. Put your comment. Put your criticism. Hammer me. I'll talk about it on one of these shows. I'll be happy to do it. You're calling for failed policies that have been tried and failed, and many of them right here in America. Our Constitutional Convention, our Constitution as it was written, all of that was done for a reason. There's a reason behind why the Founding Fathers designed the system the way they did. And even with the flaws, even with the mistakes along the way, even with the fact that it didn't properly operate as it was supposed to because of, silly people like Alexander Hamilton and John Marshall and Abraham Lincoln who tried to throw monkey wrenches into the works. Even with all of that, it still works better than any system in the history of this world. Even with all the flaws and all the errors and all the mess ups and all the damage to it, it still functions better than what you're offering. It's tried and it's true for a reason. And the closer we get back to being a constitutional republic, not a socialistic democracy, the better off we are. My friends, thanks for spending the time with me. I am so glad that all of you made it. Didn't see any chats out of YouTube, but Rumble, thank you all you chatters. Leave comments. I'll try to get to them when I can. Contact me at DouglasVGibbs.com. Right there on the screen if you're watching, DouglasVGibbs.com. In the link bar, it says Ask Doug. To the far right, right next to where it says Join. Hit the Join link if you'd like to help out by funding some of this. $9 a month, patron, because it takes funding. All of this stuff. DouglasVGibbs.com. Oh, and be sure to check out my latest book, The Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump. The Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump. Most of the arguments against him saying that he is acting unconstitutionally, I respond to in that book. We're already working on a couple of other books now also, so be on the lookout. I'm working on petitioning the government for redress of grievances. I'm working on a book called Navigation to Liberty, which is an update of my book, The Basic Constitution, and my handouts for my Constitution classes. They will go deeper, more explanatory than all of my lessons in the past. And, of course, other stuff. So visit me at DouglasVGibbs.com. Check out my book on Amazon, The Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump by Douglas V. Gibbs. And don't forget to visit me on all of my programming. Be in the chat room, participate, leave comments. This Saturday, Constitution Radio will be on the air. I was advised today that my good friend Alan Myers, who was on with me last Saturday, will not be able to join me. So if there's certain people out there like, oh, I don't know, Warhamster might want to join me on Saturday. If you can, you're more than welcome to, because my other co-host Dennis has been having difficulties figuring out how to do the, not be able to call into the station and do the internet thing. And of course, we have For the Republic on Patriot Soapbox on Sunday, 5 to 7 Pacific, and Patriot Soapbox on Friday with my good and wonderful, sweet wife, Mrs. Constitution, 2 to 4, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. on Fridays Pacific at Patriot Soapbox. Just go to DouglasVGibbs.com, hit radio. Whenever I have a new episode coming up, I put in a new post. Plus, also there's a thing up top that gives you all the shows. I got to correct it because it still has Constitution Radio on KMET. That ended on July 4th. As always, I appreciate you. Thank you, Mel, in the chat for saying good show. I appreciate all of you. Let me know you appreciate me. That's what you can also go to Ask Doug in the DouglasVGibbs.com link bar to just say, hey, Doug, I appreciate you. Thank you. I love those things. I want my fan mail folder to be thicker than my hate mail folder. It's not quite there yet. So feel free to give me some kudos while you're at it. Thanks for all that you do. United we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you. Visit me at DouglasVGibbs.com. We'll see you next time right here. Appreciate you. Stay constitutional. God bless. Bye-bye now.